Welcome to our program in a nutshell. I'm Bob Savakinus. Today we have a very special guest, Mr. Andy Zahorski. We're going to talk with Andy about one of my favorite subjects, Rocky Glen. Obviously, I'm wearing a shirt that says Ghost Town in the Glen. What became of Rocky Glen back and forth. But anyway, Andy Zahorski. Andy is the moderator of a website that is dedicated to the Friends of Rocky Glen Facebook page, has over 16,000 members from northeastern PA. He grew up in the Old Forge area, which probably started his love of Rocky Glen. He moved to the Dallas area. He never went to Hanson's Park, but Rocky Glen was his place. He graduated from Dallas High School, Penn State University. He currently works for Luzerne County 911 in their data and technical support management. He has worked and has received several awards from Governor Corbett and the House of Representatives for his work. He is also a pinball arcade fan, a pro wrestling fan. We may have some time to talk about pro wrestling. And he also has a couple other stories that he's going to share with us about Rocky Glen. I think I want to call this the program of the two titans of Rocky Glen here. Obviously, I produced 2 documentaries on Rocky Glen Park in the past, and Andy is just a wonderful person to help promote Rocky Glen in our area and the legacy and the memories that it had. Andy, welcome to our program.
Thanks for having me, buddy.
Enjoy it. 16,000 plus fans. What does that tell us about northeastern PA and its love of Rocky Glen?
That even after 34 years of it being gone, that it's just as important as it was back then. Sure, like to me, Rocky Glen is more than just an amusement park or a vacant lot as it is today. I believe that, and I actually have this on the site, that Rocky Glen is a thing as opposed to just a place. And that goes back to Ben Sterling and how generous he was to orphans, to the schools, to the Music Youth Center. It just went on and on, that generosity. And I try to push that Rocky Glen is, it was an amusement park that we all had when we were kids. But the idea of Rocky Glen is different, that be kind to people. When you see, when you go to the supermarket and they say, do you want to donate $1 and you write your name on there, write Sterling's Rocky Glen Park and keep it going. Let's not let what Ben Sterling and May did back in those days to the youth of our area, give them something to really be proud of. Like when somebody walks in and sees, I remember Rocky Glen, there it is. Somebody actually wrote it on something like that. So, to me, Rocky Glen means way more than just an old amusement park. I call it the heart of the valley with a heart. It was in between both Scranton and Wilkes-Barre. So I think it was much more than just an amusement park. And I think the people that are in that group believe it a little bit too.
It's amazing when you think of our area that this amusement park had a history for 101 years. I'm constantly amazed when I see all the postings that happen on Facebook about Rocky Glen, and you are so quick to respond, getting that information out there with newspaper stories, clippings, photos, and everything. What is it like maintaining this site, though, for 16,000+ people?
Well, I think one of the biggest things to remember about, or to understand about Rocky Glen's history is that it really has a phenomenal story from its beginning to its end in '87. And there's 2 sides to Rocky Glen history. There is the reality of what really happened, and then there is the lore or the stories of Rocky Glen. And it's not that one is wrong and one is right. Both should be celebrated because we grew up on these stories and fables of Rocky Glen. The most obvious one is the $1 Million Coaster, which we've discussed. Was not $1 million, but just because we know today it's not $1 million coaster, we're not going to rewrite history and say, well, it's going to be the $100,000 coaster, So there are stories and fables that have been told to us over the years, but the group is there to honor both the history and the fables. And I think it's important to make sure that people understand that what you're understanding is this is the reality, but you've been told this over time. It's carny talk. That's how Ben Sterling was, and all the promoters from A.J. Duffy and Esslinger and Murphy, they all, and Frothingham himself, they all told these stories of Rocky Glen, and we've all believed it over the time, and both should be celebrated.
When you look at that history and everything, just reading your bio a little bit, you grew up in the Old Forge area, so childhood recollections of Rocky Glen, what were they?
Man, I remember the Monster Mouse above anything because that thing was so rickety. And I think it was in the park only 1 year in '82. But man, it was different because in the past, Rocky Glen had one major coaster at that point, which was the Jet Coaster, or the Mighty Lightning as it was renamed. But then they had a second coaster, and it was like, wow, a second coaster. I don't think I've ever been scared as much on that metal coaster. It was a wild mouse coaster. For people who have never seen pictures, it's rare to find pictures of it. We do have a couple on our site, but man, that was one of the big things I remember. It's funny. I can never remember going in the Swiss Cottage, and that's one of the things I regret. Not going in just to see what it looks like, because people have sent me pictures like, is this the inside of the cottage? I'm like, I don't know. I never got to see the inside, so I can't verify if it's inside. I can remember also the Niagara Falls slide, which was a metal slide that was on the far side near the outlet, was not in operation, but I can remember as a child going down there and peeking through the wood and seeing it laying down on the ground. You can see the slide because it would raise it up, and that's how people would slide down it. And I can remember looking in and seeing the slide, like, man, why isn't this up? Why isn't this running? So I mean, my childhood with Rocky Glen was, it's funny. I take a lot of flack for this, but I tell the story of when my parents divorced. I would come to visit my father. My father would drop me off at Rocky Glen. Now I was only maybe 8 years old at the time, and what I didn't understand at that point was my father was doing it to get rid of me. It is what it is. So I can laugh about it today.
But it was a safe, secure environment
then,
you were at too.
Back then, it wasn't like it is today, where everybody's a nervous Nelly. Back then, the most famous kidnapping was Walsh, Adam Walsh. And then everybody was like, "Oh, you can't even go in Sears without your mom being around." They're always protective of him. But he would drop me off and pick me up later in the day. And I didn't realize it till later on that he was just doing it to push me away. So I get a lot of jokes put my way because of I said Rocky Glen is my father from The Empire Strikes Back, and I know people who watch this are going to laugh at it too, and that's okay. You can laugh, but that was reality. I was dropped off, and go and do your thing, and it's sad when I thought about it. But I didn't realize it back then, because when your dad gives you $125 to go to Rocky Glen and just do whatever you want, I'm not going to argue that point. I was happy back then. But it wasn't until I got up later and I realized what was really going on. So, but that's why Rocky Glen is very dear to me. It was like my father.
That's a very interesting observation, just because my own dealings with Rocky Glen, growing up as a kid in the late 70s and everything, that's where I spent a lot of time at Rocky Glen, school picnics and everything with my mom and my family and everything. And that's something that we miss in northeastern Pennsylvania, and I think in a lot of society. A safe location, a place that families would go at a relatively low cost, a lot of fun, a lot of activities and everything. So if you had to pick some of your favorite rides and attractions at Rocky Glen, what were they?
Oh, the Jet, without a doubt. My first large coaster. Okay. It was always, I can remember still being scared to ride it, that I would ride the smaller metal coaster, which was in the Kittyland area. And where that was positioned, when you went up the lift hill, you would make a left turn, and then that left turn put you directly with the ledge where the Lower Station would have been. But you make that left turn and you do not go over the ledge. But boy, every time you would hit it, you would make a really sharp left turn. And I always felt like this one's going to be the one. This one's going to be the one. But it never happened. But I used to love the Kitty coaster, was a big thing. The other rides like Scramblers and stuff were never appealed to me. Dodgems did. I liked the Dodgems. And that Dodgems was there for a very long time. They had the Haunted House, which was later Nightmare Castle, which was remodeled from food stands. That was right across from the Jet. That, if I remember correctly, was like a half walk through, half ride. And that was interesting. You don't see that too often, and there's not many pictures that exist of that. We got a couple on the site.
Just because you mentioned that the idea of unique attractions and everything, and this is one that most people that you talk to will always remember about Rocky Glen, but yet nobody has images. But I know you have a few on your site. Was the Tilted House?
Tilted House. I'm going to tell you, it was one of the hardest to find pictures of, and we did have a couple people come forward and actually bring us pictures of it. Very rare ones inside. We have one or two that are from the inside, but the Tilted House was just an anomaly on its own. People just loved it. And why is that? You didn't have to pay for it. You just went in and you enjoyed it, and that's what people like. There was actually just a picture shared just last week of people swimming in the lake, and in the background you can see the Tilted House. And I pointed that out to everybody, and everybody's like, "Oh my gosh, there it is!" Sure enough.
How about concerts? Rocky Glen had a long history of concerts going way back to the 1930s and 40s with major acts, going all the way up to its close. Yeah. Bon Jovi, Eddie Money plays, concerts, acts like that. Yeah. Did you attend any of those shows?
I was too young for concerts by then. In '84 I was only 11, and that's when Bon Jovi was. They were the concerts that Roth was putting on. And those times were just taking off. But I was still at that point where the high school kids were in these concerts, and you didn't want to go around the big kids. So I missed it. But it is amazing to learn of all the concerts and people who have been there over the years.
Tell us a little bit about some of them.
Well, like you mentioned, Frank Sinatra, when he was a very young performer, was at what I believe it would have been in the what's called the Golden Nugget Casino, but back then that was the dance hall, the circular part of the arcade, and some of the Cisco Kid and stuff, it's just amazing the entertainers over the years, and then late '80s when concerts were people wanted concerts, Bon Jovi and I can't think of some of the other ones that
Eddie
Money, yeah.
Jerry Garcia,
Meatloaf, and Jerry Garcia,
Jefferson
was
Starship,
there. and the Jerry Garcia recording is actually on YouTube. I've seen people share that before. So it's the history of this area's Rocky Glen. It was just a mecca for entertainment. Back in the 20s and teens, even the 30s, dancing was so big that's what they did. They hey, we're going to Rocky Glen. That was the place to go, just to go dancing. It wasn't necessarily even for go ride rides. That's where everybody was going to go for the day and the weekend. And man, it's amazing. Like the Crystal Dance Pavilion, which was built in 1911 to replace the more famous postcard that we see out there with it's a white building. That was the first dance hall. When that burned, they built the Crystal Dance Pavilion, and that thing was enormous. They eventually turned it into a fun house and moved dancing, because by the 30s and late 20s, dancing was starting to wane a little bit. And they we got to make these better attractions. And that fun house had so many Coney Island type rides inside of it that it's rare to find pictures of the inside of it. I believe your DVD actually had pictures on the outside, but still, it's a rare occurrence to see pictures from it.
Well, I also would just look at, and we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the warm days, the mighty 590, the days in the late 50s and 60s. I believe it's Amusement Business or one of the national published magazines that they have a cover of Rocky Glen, and people sitting in trees attending this concert, because there was just thousands of people that came out to Rocky Glen for those mighty 590 WARM days.
It's amazing that some people will never really grasp how many people went to this park and its impact on everybody from our youth to even today. Kids want to know what was this? Well, it was an amusement park, but it was a lot more than just an amusement park. It was dancing. It was the place to go and hang out. Boat, go out in a canoe, swim. It was definitely a more than just a regular amusement park. And you don't really see too many amusement parks with that many people. Like you said, people in the trees. I think they're on top of the heyday, trying to get a glimpse of the concerts going on. So it was definitely a different time, and I had said in the past that I don't the kids of today won't understand what Rocky Glen meant, but I always said, imagine if Knoebels was gone tomorrow,
Right.
gone, like just we have to close, we're done, and every kid would be like, well, wait a minute, what am I going to do now? And that's what we have with Rocky Glen, because Rocky Glen was not supposed to close. You know, in '88 they wanted to open, but there were disagreements in the backside that was not made public, and they just decided, well, we're not going to open, and we're going to sell off everything. If you know, it was a fight in the backside of what going on. It wasn't all insurance, which is what the public face was in the papers. They said, you know, oh, insurance is getting high, that's why we're moving on. But it was disagreements. You know, that's what killed Rocky Glen in the end. But innovation in the end. You know, getting that big ride is what they needed, and they just couldn't do it. You know, they just didn't have the resources.
You mentioned the idea about all the people that went to Rocky Glen. And of course, Rocky Glen started off as like basically a trolley park. The late Ed Miller, who was just a wealth of knowledge with the Laurel Line that was so important to northeastern Pennsylvania. And the Laurel Line, of course, would have been the trolley system that pretty much shuttled everyone between Luzerne and Lackawanna County. But I've seen some statistics that up to 250,000 people per year were riding the Laurel Line to Rocky Glen in the late 20s into the early 30s and everything. So we're talking 100 years ago, 250,000 plus people going by a trolley to Rocky Glen Park. Yeah. And it just shows the history and how important Rocky Glen was to our area.
Yeah, I mean, it's today's I-81, Interstate 81. I mean, it's the shuttle between both cities, and that's what it was. And Rocky Glen was essentially right in the middle. You know, it was just amazing. I wish I got to meet Ed Miller. I know he passed away a couple years ago, but you know, thank God that he took those videos.
Yes.
That I believe you used in the DVD, because I was blown away when I first saw them, you know, and you know, seeing the trolley coming along the $1 million coaster, you know, it's just a sight you would never imagine seeing, you know, and sure enough, somebody had the foresight to get some video of it, and I know there's more out there. We just got to find it. Right. You know, there's more pictures. I still get blown away. You know, every couple months somebody will post a picture that's so rare. From the 40s or 30s that I mean, I myself have bought some online, and I share them immediately because why keep them? Why hide them in my personal photo albums? I mean, it's for everybody to see. You know, I'd rather share the history with people than to try to keep it as my own and say, well, this is mine, and I want people to see everything that I get. Yeah, I'll try to touch them up and fix them because photos from nearly 80 years ago are starting to tear and stuff. But I want people to understand what Rocky Glen was. I just shared some recent pictures of 1944, July 4th, and it's all women because the men were away at World War II. And so you don't see very many men in there, and if you do, they're wearing their service.
So we have Memorial Day is approaching shortly. What did that mean to Rocky Glen Memorial Day?
Rocky Glen was always the kickoff of the summer, and it's the unofficial beginning of summer, and it's the biggest coasters started. Like this year is the $1 Million Coaster's 75th anniversary. It's 2021, so that is 75 years ago. The $1 Million was built and ready to go. It's a big milestone. Last year in August was the Mountain Dips Coaster's 100th anniversary, and again, the May was always the beginning. What's the new ride? What are we going to see this year? And it was always excitement. It was almost like a Christmas. Like, what did they do different at the parks? And I mean, you could say that for just about every park. What do they have new? What's exciting? We'll go on Memorial Day and find out. And
for over 100 years in northeastern PA, Rocky Glen started off the summer season at Memorial Weekend.
Yeah, and it was a fantastic time. It's just mind-blowing that it's not here. It didn't evolve in some fashion, and it's just an empty lot with overgrown weeds now.
It brings up an interesting subject. A few years back, Lackawanna County, we looked at the idea of Rocky Glen Park and how important it was to the area, and we put an advisory group together and everything. We've had a couple meetings, of course, both of us being members of the committee and everything. And just so many people always say whatever happened or what will happen with Rocky Glen down the road and everything. And just in your opinion, just because of your love of Rocky Glen and maintaining 16,000 people on Facebook and everything, what do you see, or what would you like to see Rocky Glen, the land, become again?
Well, in a real world where, hey, we got the land and we can do something with it, I think the honest opinion would be you would see a return to Rocky Glen in the early 1900s.
And tell us about what would that look like?
Well, back in those days, the rides and the stands were not owned by one person. They were individually owned. They had to have their own insurance. And, like, hey, you got a spot for a Ferris wheel? Okay, here's your Ferris wheel. You put it here. I own the land, and I take, 15% of whatever you make off of that. It would have to be something like that. It would not be a park that is solely owned by somebody unless literally somebody won the lottery and was willing to put all the money in. I think you'd see a return to that where, the local stands that are really great food today, and people know who their best hot dog stand is. Those people would be the ones who would have to create a stand there to bring people in to serve them their food, pizza, something like that. That's what would it have to be. It wouldn't be something that one person controls everything in the park. We would have to have it piecemealed. Could it be done? Absolutely. If the right persons are there and they want to do something like that, it can succeed. It's got to be done the right way. You can't just put, it's going to be Knoebels 2 right there. It's not going to be, not for many, many moons. So, but it could be done, yes, with the right foresight to see what it could be, it could be. I don't know if we'll see that now that the dam has been lowered. The lake is essentially not there anymore. I think a couple years ago it would have been Prospect. Today, I'm not so sure it would be. I'm not so sure it would be worth it today. But that's not to say it has to be at the old grounds. I mean, there are potentially other places there out there, but if it's not Rocky Glen, it always seems like it wouldn't be a Rocky Glen. We'd have to come up with a new name for something like that.
I'm always amazed, though, when you hear the nostalgia factor. So you're looking at generations of people that still remember Rocky Glen. And I think that's one of the things that we lost in our area. When we lost Rocky Glen, we lost that generational connection on just that old-time feeling of the way things happened. And I'd have to agree with you on it. And just because we're actually freely talking about this concept of Rocky Glen, for myself, I mean, I would always envision, we're not going to see a big roller coaster ride and everything, but there's no reason we couldn't see a couple kids rides. We couldn't see a small train operating. We couldn't see some hiking, some picnic tables, pavilions set up so that people can bring back that old-time nostalgia feeling that still is out there. There's still that segment of people that want to experience this.
One of the biggest things that is happening across America is cities are getting carousels, and they're building a carousel house, and they're basically putting it, like the most recent one I know in Buffalo, they're putting one right on the waterfront. And of course, kids love a carousel. They'll never when they grow up, they're tired of it, but they'll ride it over and over. And I think that you get the right sprinkle of rides in there. Yeah, I think you can get somebody who be like, hey, it's Saturday, let's go up to Rocky Glen for 3 hours, and then then come out when we're done, instead of having to drive to Knoebels. And that's not a knock on Knoebels. It's far for a lot of the Scranton Wilkes-Barre people to have to come.
So I'm wearing a Ghost Town shirt, Ghost Town in the Glen. Did you experience Ghost Town in the Glen, or were you too young?
I did, but not the gunshots and then the gunfighters.
Right.
There was actually it was essentially a ghost town when I was there because there was no shows going on.
Okay.
So I remember going down there, and I think that goes back to why I never went in the Swiss Cottage. When you go down to the lake, there was really nothing going on. There were no more shows or anything like that. I seem to recall the tail end of Ghost Town in the Glen, but I remember mostly going down there, and it was just buildings, and I just thought they were buildings that just stood and didn't really have anything to them. And so the rides are up on the hill. I'm going to go back up on the hill and go back there.
What I thought was interesting for myself, I was in grade school at that point. We used to have our school picnics, and just to see these gunfight shows, these Western themed shows, the saloon, the can-can dancers and everything here in Moosic, Pennsylvania. It was just another experience.
And I think it would have had to evolve. Like Ghost Town was a good concept, but I think they would have had to evolve the park from the Western theme into something else in the 80s, and it never happened. Coal mining was our big thing around here. So if they maybe adapted something with the coal mine theme, maybe that would have piqued more interest for at least another 15, 20 years, and then they'd have to, remodel again, but it never came. So we were left with a literal ghost town in Ghost Town.
I started off earlier by just, again, commenting on how much you monitor that website and you constantly respond to, and you find, I don't even know where you find all these images and photos and newspaper articles and everything whenever people are commenting and posting and things like that. So tell us a little bit, what is the official website? Facebook page, I should say.
The Facebook page is Rocky Glen Park Memories.
Okay.
It was created by a lady named Julie Pollock. She actually, I believe she explained one time she did it kind of on a dare to show her husband that she could, you can create anything on Facebook, and she created the group. And when the group started getting a little more popular, you start getting spam. People posting flea markets and stuff like that, and that's not what we want. There's groups for that. So she was getting a little bit overwhelmed, and I offered to do it. Now I would not even consider myself a historian back then, but then people started asking questions, and I didn't know the answer to. So I had to start researching it, and then I find the articles that, well, here's what the article says. Take it with a grain of salt. I wasn't there, so I can't tell you if it really happened or not. But here's what the paper reported, back in the 30s. So this is what we go with. Until we can. And the history is always evolving. It's never been like this is the way it is. It's always evolving. We learn something new. Like I might research something like, oh gosh, I didn't know that. And I have to change what I thought was right. And I don't have a problem with that at all. Because I'd rather it be right out there as opposed to being confused. One of the biggest ones was the Mountain Dips coaster and the Pippin coaster. Over time, people merged them together as one coaster. But they were actually two separate large coasters, but over time it's been forgotten and people just merged them both together, and I thought it was two until I saw a picture with both of them on a flyover from 1939. I'm like, that's two separate coasters. And then I figured it out by looking at little pictures that it was actually two coasters. So I had to correct my history on that. And that it's going to happen again, I'm sure. Eventually I'll uncover something else that needs to be explained. So it's ever evolving.
So we look at Rocky Glen, and 101 years in the area. The early 1900s, it was just basically the lake boating, fishing, ice skating, things like that. We move on. We have the Sterling eras. We have the Nayland and Jennings. We have the Ghost Town era. Of course, the 80s with all the concerts and everything. And then, of course, what it's become now, which is basically just the grounds. That's all that's left. So put yourself back. What era would you have wanted to have experienced Rocky Glen the most?
1938.
Tell us why.
Because both coasters were still in existence. And that's something that, like, every park had a coaster. When you look at our history, Angela had the Valley Volcano, the Speedhound was at Hanson's, the Bearcat was at Sansui, and they had one coaster. But Rocky Glen had two at the same time, because Rocky Glen was two parks, essentially. That is the most fascinating thing to learn was that, well, wait a minute. We had two coasters in this park, not just one, which is the one we all remember was the jet coaster. They had two coasters. So my great-grandparents had the experience of two coasters, and they were great coasters for their time. And then, of course, the $1 Million, later on, when the Mountain Dips was torn down, they built the $1 Million coaster, and, I mean, that thing was just, everybody's seen pictures of it. It's just mind-blowing to know that our area had a coaster of that size in 1946, not in the 80s, in 1946. So that would be the era I want to. The Sterlings were very friendly with the Nayland and Jennings back then, so the park was still one You could walk between the parks without the spite fence, trying to climb over it. So I think that time era that's the late 30s, the Three Stooge era is the era that, when I watched the Three Stooges, that's the era I think I would have enjoyed the most. I go back in time, that's the first place I'd go.
There's just so much interest in Rocky Glen, and as I mentioned earlier, I did the 2 documentaries, and I sit here with you and I say we're the 2 titans of Rocky Glen with so much love and knowledge and everything of Rocky Glen, and I propose saying maybe we should look at doing a part 3 documentary. What are your thoughts on that? Just to further...
Absolutely. I mean, I think if there's enough great footage out there, I think absolutely. I think that preserving the history of the park the best we can, I think a third DVD would be a great idea. Is there enough new footage out there? Maybe not, but maybe this can be the Return of the Jedi, and it's the final one that's not just 45 minutes long. It might be a 2-hour one where we include all the footage that exists and all the stories. Try to get all new stories because there's 16,000 people in the group. I'm sure we can muster a few people. I think if we actually, now that we have like the group going, if you had the Steamtown, I know you guys sold out like 2 or 3.
Right, the premieres.
I think you'd sell a lot more because people would come into town for it. People would be more aware of it. I didn't know about it in the early years. I heard about the DVD later on, but I mean, absolutely, I think it would be a great thing for our area, not just for us. Us telling the stories of the Glen is secondary to a grandfather showing their grandson. This is what my Knoebels was. Here, look at it. Look at all the rides we had and all the stuff that we got to enjoy. I think that's more important to me than anything.
Well, unfortunately, our time is coming to an end with the show today, just because how do we compact 100-year history plus contemporary history of Rocky Glen into a half hour? But final thoughts on Rocky Glen, in your opinion, Andy?
I think that Rocky Glen is going to live on in some fashion, whether it's a vacant amusement park or if it's an idea. I think that Rocky Glen will continue in some fashion. And who knows, 100 years from now, somebody could be watching this and learning about what we were learning about Rocky Glen. Because I know people like Frothingham and A.J. Duffy and Ben Sterling were not thinking that they'd be on some kind of computer digital site in 2021. So in 21, they could be watching us and learning about Rocky Glen through this medium. So.
Well, I want to thank you, Andy Zahorsky, for all that you do in promoting Rocky Glen, its legacy, maintaining the Facebook page, Friends of Rocky Glen. Thank you for spending some time with us and reminiscing and taking that trip back down to Rocky Glen. I'm Bob Savakinus. Thank you for tuning into our program in a nutshell. And I just want to ask everyone out there that's watching the show, open up your hearts and minds and open up Rocky Glen Park one more time for yourself.